The rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor was the only steady thing in the chaos. Lena Adebayo moved through the emergency room like a current in a storm-tossed sea, a calm center in a world of frantic energy. Her light blue scrubs were a whisper of tranquility against the stark white and frantic red of Trauma Bay 3. She titrated a dopamine drip with practiced ease, her fingers steady, her voice a low, reassuring hum to the man whose heart was struggling to remember its own beat. 27 years of life, 5 of them in the crucible of this city hospital, had taught her how to build walls around the part of herself that felt. Here, she was a professional. Competent. Unflappable. It was a carefully constructed identity, one that kept the ghosts at bay. The first sign of disruption wasn't a sound, but a vibration. A low, thrumming pulse that resonated through the concrete floor, rattling the instrument trays. It grew louder, a deep, percussive whump-whump-whump that drowned out the sirens and the shouting. Nurses and doctors froze, looking up at the ceiling as if expecting it to crack. It was the sound of a helicopter, but it was wrong. Too close. Too powerful. Medevac choppers had a higher, more desperate whine. This was the sound of military-grade machinery. Lena ignored it, focusing on her patient. "Pressure is stabilizing," she murmured to the resident beside her. "Let's get him moved up to the CCU." But the world outside refused to be ignored. The vibrations intensified, and then a second, identical sound joined the first, a terrifying harmony of raw power. Through the bay's large windows, she saw them. 2 sleek, black helicopters, unmarked and menacing, descending on the hospital's rooftop helipad like birds of prey. They were not for saving lives. They were built for ending them. Panic began to ripple through the ER. Security guards were shouting into their radios, their faces pale. Before anyone could form a coherent plan, the doors to the ambulance bay burst open. Not with paramedics, but with 6 men in impeccably tailored black suits. They moved with a chilling, synchronized grace, their presence sucking the air out of the room. They formed a silent, human perimeter, their eyes sweeping the space with cold, predatory assessment. And then he walked in. He was the center of their silent storm. The suit he wore was probably Tom Ford, the charcoal wool hugging broad shoulders with a precision that spoke of thousands of dollars and countless hours of tailoring. A sliver of a white cuff, a platinum watch on his wrist, the subtle glint of a tie pin, every detail was an assertion of absolute control. But it was his stillness that commanded the room. In the midst of the ER's inherent chaos, he was an island of lethal calm. His face was carved from hard angles and shadows, his black hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the room once, dismissing everyone until they found her. He walked directly toward Trauma Bay 3, not with a swagger, but with the deliberate, inexorable purpose of a man who had never been told no. 2 of his men followed, pushing a gurney. On it, another man lay, pale and sweating, his own suit stained dark with blood at the abdomen. But the leader's focus was not on his injured soldier. It was entirely on Lena. He stopped just outside the bay. The hospital's chief of surgery, a man known for his blustering arrogance, stepped forward. "This is a restricted area. You can't just..." The man didn't even look at him. His gaze remained locked on Lena. "I need a nurse," he said, his voice a low baritone, smooth as polished granite, and just as cold. It carried an accent, a faint Korean edge that only sharpened its precision. "We have plenty of qualified staff," the chief sputtered. "One will be assigned to you." "I don't want one," the man replied, his eyes never leaving Lena's. "I want her." He took another step forward, his presence a physical pressure. "I need Lena Adebayo." A cold dread, unfamiliar and ancient, snaked up Lena's spine. No one in this life knew her like that. No one from that world. She had buried that person, burned the letters, changed her number, moved 1,000 miles away. She had built Lena Adebayo from the ashes of someone else. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something that might have been impatience. "I was told I could find Nix here." The name hit her like a physical blow. Nix. A ghost. A whisper from a life of shadows and blood. A life She had barely survived. A life that had left its mark on her. A brand of ink and pain hidden beneath the sterile blue fabric of her scrubs, right over her heart. A stylized raven, its wings spread in silent flight. The emblem of the Black Vipers, a syndicate that had been wiped off the face of the earth 7 years ago. Her carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. The ER, the patient, the resident, it all faded into a dull, roaring periphery. There was only the man in the Tom Ford suit and the ghost he had just summoned. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice tight. "My name is Kwon Jinwoo," he said, as if that should mean something to her.
And perhaps it should have.
The name was whispered in certain circles, a name synonymous with the rise of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, the organization that had absorbed the territories of a dozen fallen rivals, including the Vipers. He was the most powerful man in the Seoul underworld, an emperor whose influence stretched across the Pacific. "My man has been shot, but that's not the problem. The bullet was laced with something. Your hospital's toxicology screens won't find it." He took another step, his cologne reaching her, a subtle, clean scent of cedar and something darker, like smoke. "But you will." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A claim.
He knew who she was.
What she was. What she could do. The Vipers hadn't just been muscle. Their speciality had been chemistry. Poisons and their antidotes. Nyx had been their master chemist. "That person is dead," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Is she?" His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, to the spot on her chest where the tattoo was hidden. The gesture was so specific, so certain, it made her skin crawl. He knew everything. "My sources say she is very much alive. They say she is the only person on this continent who can identify Aconite 7. And I need the antidote.
Now."
The chief of surgery finally found his voice. "This is insane." Security. Jin Woo's men didn't even flinch. He simply raised a hand, a small, economical gesture that stopped the guards in their tracks. His eyes returned to Lena, and in them, she saw the cold, hard truth. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a summons. She was a ghost he had dragged back into the world of the living, and he would not let her go. Saying no would mean a bloodbath right here in the ER. Saying yes meant stepping back into the grave she had clawed her way out of. "Get him into a private room," she said, the words tasting like ash. "And get everyone else out." Her voice was Nyx's voice, cold, clipped, and authoritative. She had made her choice. Or rather, he had made it for her. That was the moment her new life ended, and the old one reached out to claim her once more. The private suite on the top floor felt like a cage, albeit a luxurious one. Jin Woo's men stood guard outside, silent sentinels turning the hospital corridor into a hostile border. Inside, the world had shrunk to the four walls, the steady beep of the machines connected to the injured man, and the suffocating presence of Kwon Jin-woo himself. Lena worked, slipping back into a headspace she hadn't occupied in years. She wasn't Lena, the nurse. She was Nyx, the chemist. She drew blood, ignoring the standard hospital protocols and running her own series of diagnostic tests on a portable analysis kit one of Jin-woo's men had brought in. The equipment was state-of-the-art, far more advanced than what the hospital owned. It was a stark reminder of the resources he commanded. He watched her from a chair in the corner, unmoving. He didn't speak, didn't fidget. He just watched, his stillness a palpable force. She could feel his eyes on her back, on her hands as she measured reagents, on the line of her neck. She told herself it was survival instinct, the heightened awareness of a prey animal in the presence of a predator. But it was more than that. His attention was a weight, a claim. "It's Aconite 7, she finally said, turning from the analyzer. The confirmation settled in her gut like a cold stone. Modified. The Kionma Syndicate's signature. For the first time, an emotion flickered across Jin-woo's face. A cold, deep-seated hatred that made the room temperature drop. "I know. The standard antidote will be useless," she continued, her voice all business. "The modifier accelerates neural degradation. He has maybe 2 hours. Can you synthesize the counteragent? Here? With this?" I can make enough for one dose. A temporary one. It'll slow the process. Buy him another 12 hours. But to make a stable, permanent cure, I need a real lab. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I have one. Of course he did. A man like him would have everything. She turned back to her work, her hands moving with a speed and precision that was pure muscle memory. She was Nyx again, and the familiarity of it was as terrifying as it was comforting. This she was good at. This made sense. The world of saving strangers with kindness and sterile gauze felt a million miles away. As she worked, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. She expected him to be impatient, to press her. Instead, he remained quiet. They used it on her, too, he said, his voice so low she almost missed it. Lena paused, her hand hovering over a vial. She didn't turn around. Her? Hannah, he said. The name was a shard of glass in his throat. She was a prosecutor. A good one. She thought she could fix the world from the inside. He fell silent for a long moment. She trusted me. I told her she was safe under my protection. The Kiyama used this poison on her. It was meant for me. The story hung in the air between them, a raw, exposed nerve. His wound. The one vulnerability he carried. Not a betrayal by blood, but a failure to protect the woman he loved. An adult, a professional, lost not to a stray bullet, but to the insidious, calculated cruelty of his world. Lena understood that kind of loss. The Vipers had been her family, and she had watched them fall. She finished preparing the injection. The syringe was full of a pale, amber liquid. The temporary cure. She walked over to the patient and administered it smoothly into his foreline. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the man's violent tremors began to subside. The sweat on his brow lessened. His breathing deepened, becoming more regular. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She felt a tremor in her own hand, the adrenaline of the past hour finally catching up to her. Before she could clench her fist to hide it, Jinwoo was beside her. He didn't touch her, but he placed a cold bottle of water on the table next to her hand. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture. An acknowledgement. A flicker of something that wasn't cold calculation. My penthouse has a fully equipped biochemical lab, he said, his voice back to its neutral, commanding tone. We leave in 5 minutes. She looked from the stabilized man on the bed to the unreadable mask of Jinwoo's face. She could refuse. She could scream, try to alert the hospital staff that she was being taken against her will. But she knew it was pointless. His men controlled the floor. And beyond that, a deeper, colder logic had taken hold. The Kiyama Syndicate was back. They knew Jinwoo was their target. And now, they had seen her with him. They would not know she was a nurse. They would only know that someone had counteracted their poison. They would hunt for the chemist. They would hunt for Nyx. Running was no longer an option. Staying with him, the most dangerous man she had ever met, was paradoxically the safest place to be. Fine, she said, meeting his gaze. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of their pasts, with the shared, unspoken knowledge of violence and loss. But I'm driving. A corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. No, he said. And that was that. The transition from the hospital's sterile white corridors to the black leather interior of his armored sedan was jarring. The city lights of Los Angeles smeared past the tinted windows, a world she no longer belonged to. They drove in silence, flanked by a second identical car, a silent, deadly motorcade slicing through the night. They arrived at a sleek, glass skyscraper in Century City that scraped the clouds. The private elevator ascended without a sound, opening directly into his penthouse. It was less a home than a fortress with a view. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a glittering panorama of the city, but the glass was thick, ballistic. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and impersonal. It was the home of a man who valued security over comfort, power over sentiment. He led her past a sprawling living area to a steel door that opened with a biometric scanner, recognizing his thumbprint. The lab was staggering. It was a professional-grade biochemical facility, cleaner and better equipped than most pharmaceutical companies. He had not been exaggerating. "Everything you need?" he asked. "And more," she admitted, her old professional instincts kicking in. She began to move around the space, her mind already calculating formulas, sequencing the counteragent. This was her element. For the next few hours, she worked. Jin-woo left her alone, but she could feel his presence just outside the lab, a silent guard. She found a rhythm, losing herself in the precise, demanding work. It was in a lull, while waiting for a centrifuge to finish its cycle, that she made a mistake. A locked file cabinet stood in the corner of the lab. Her curiosity, a trait that had gotten Nyx into trouble more than once, got the better of her. The lock was complex, but she had learned how to bypass more than just chemical bonds. Within minutes, she had it open. Inside were files. Old files, on paper, not digital. They were about syndicate territories, acquisitions. And one folder had a familiar emblem on it, a stylized raven. The Black Vipers. Her breath caught. She opened it. Inside were detailed reports on the Vipers' collapse. It was a hostile takeover, orchestrated by the Kionma and another rival. But the last pages detailed the aftermath. The Golden Dragon Syndicate, Jin-woo's organization, had moved in, absorbing the Vipers' remaining assets, their territory, and their personnel files. He hadn't just heard about Nyx. He had her entire file. He knew her real name, her place of birth, her skills, her associates. He owned her past. A cold fury washed over her. She was not an ally he had sought out. She was an asset he had claimed. An old piece of property he had decided to reactivate. She was about to slam the drawer shut when the world exploded. A concussive blast blew the lab's steel door off its hinges. The reinforced windows of the penthouse spiderwebbed but held. Alarms blared. Gunfire erupted from the main living area, sharp, automatic cracks that stitched the air. They were under attack. Jin-woo was in the lab in an instant, a pistol appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her down behind a reinforced steel workbench. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a blade of ice in the chaos. He moved with a terrifying grace, using the lab equipment for cover, firing back with economical precision. He wasn't panicked. He was in his element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of violence. Lena watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as he took down two assailants who tried to breach the lab. He moved like the room owed him space. One of the attackers, dressed in black tactical gear, managed to get the drop on him from the side. He was raising his weapon, the muzzle pointed directly at Jin-woo's exposed back. There was no time to shout a warning.
No time to think.
Lena's body moved on pure, buried instinct. She lunged, grabbing a heavy, solid-state spectrometer from a nearby counter. With a cry that was torn from her throat, she swung it with all her strength, crashing it against the side of the attacker's helmeted head. The man crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. She stood over him, panting, the heavy piece of equipment still in her hands. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from adrenaline. It was from the shock of what she had done. She had crossed a line. The quiet, peaceful life she had built was a lie, and she had just proved it to herself. She had chosen violence to protect him. The gunfire outside subsided. Jin-woo's men were ruthlessly efficient. He straightened up, his eyes finding hers across the ruined lab. He looked at her, at the makeshift weapon in her hands, at the fallen man at her feet. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were dark with an intensity that burned. He walked over to her, his steps sure and silent amidst the debris. He stopped just in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out, not to take the spectrometer, but to gently take her hand. He turned it over, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I brought you into this for your mind," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I didn't realize I was bringing back a ghost. That ghost died 7 years ago," she said, her voice rough. He shook his head slowly, his gaze holding hers captive. "No, He lifted his other hand and gently touched the fabric of her scrubs, his fingers resting over the place where her tattoo was hidden. The contact was electric, a brand through the thin cotton. "She's right here," his eyes darkened further. "And I have no intention of letting her go again." It wasn't a confession of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was a statement of ownership, a claim. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his home and the echoes of violence, she didn't pull away. The aftermath was a whirlwind of quiet, lethal efficiency. Jinwoo's men cleaned up the mess, removing the bodies and debris with a chilling lack of ceremony. One of them, a man with a long scar down his cheek, brought them intel from a captured attacker. "The Kyeonma Syndicate," he reported to Jinwoo, though his eyes kept flicking to Lena. "They know who she is. Not just a nurse. They know she's Nyx. They've put a price on her head. They want the chemist." The threat was no longer abstract. It wasn't just about Jinwoo anymore. It was about her. She had been targeted. Her past had finally caught her, and it wanted her dead. Jinwoo dismissed his man with a curt nod. He turned to Lena, his face a hard mask. "They will not get to you. This isn't about you protecting me," she shot back, her fear transmuting into anger. "They're coming for me because of what I can do. That makes me an asset, not a liability you need to hide." She took a step closer to him, refusing to be intimidated. "You're planning to hit back. I know you are. And I'm going with you." "Absolutely not. You need me," she insisted, her voice dropping, becoming the cold, certain voice of Nyx. "I know their protocols. I know how their chemists think. I know they use secondary security systems based on chemical sniffers and pressure plates that your men will walk right into. You need Nyx to hunt them, not just Lena to make a cure. I'm the only one who can get you inside their main lab without you losing half your men." He stared at her, a war raging in his dark eyes. The cold tactician in him knew she was right. The man who had lost Hannah to his world was fighting a losing battle. He had tried to keep her separate, to use only her mind, but she had forced her way into the center of the conflict. She had saved his life. She had proven she was more than a scientist. She was a survivor of the world he inhabited. "You will do exactly as I say," he said finally. It was not an agreement, but a concession, a surrender to the inevitable truth. Their fates were now intertwined. The final confrontation was set for 2 nights later. The Kyeonma Syndicate's main lab and headquarters was hidden in a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district. Lena wasn't on the front line with a weapon. Her place was in the tactical van a block away, surrounded by monitors and communication equipment. She was the ghost in their machine. As Jinwoo's team breached the perimeter, she guided them, her voice calm and clear in their earpieces. 2 hostiles southwest corner behind the storage tanks. Hold. The floor ahead is rigged. Bypassing now, she worked on a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen, disabling security systems she recognized from years ago. She was dismantling the work of a man who had once been her rival in the Viper Syndicate, a chemist who had defected to the Kyeonma. She knew his digital fingerprints, his habits, his vanities. Jinwoo moved through the warehouse like a phantom, his team flowing behind him. The fight was brutal and short, but the leader, a man named Cho, was nowhere to be found. "He's running." Jinwoo's voice crackled in her ear. No visual. "Wait," Lena said, her eyes scanning the schematics she had hacked. She saw it, a detail no one else would notice. A hidden ventilation shaft, reinforced, leading to the roof. It wasn't an escape route. It was an ambush point. It's a trap. He's not running. He's on the roof above the main lab. He's going to vent the nerve agent into the building. She didn't wait for an answer. She was already out of the van, running. She knew the building's layout. There was an external maintenance ladder. She scaled it, her muscles screaming, the nurse's scrubs tearing on the rusted metal. She reached the roof, just as Cho was about to open the main valve. He turned, surprised, and leveled his pistol at her. A shot rang out, but it wasn't his. A red flower bloomed on Cho's chest. He staggered back, his finger tightening on the trigger in a death spasm. The shot went wide. Behind him, emerging from the rooftop access door, was Jinwoo. He hadn't hesitated. He had trusted her, followed her intel without question, and arrived just in time. The silence on the rooftop was profound, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. The city glittered around them, oblivious. Jinwoo walked over to her, his gun now lowered. He checked her for injuries with a sweep of his eyes, a silent, intense inventory. They returned to the penthouse. The broken door was gone, replaced. The blood was gone. The place was sterile again, as if the violence had never happened. But it had. It had settled in the space between them, a permanent change in the atmosphere. He stood by the vast window, looking out at the city that was his kingdom. Lena stood a few feet away, watching his reflection in the glass. Her old life was gone. The quiet anonymity she had cherished was a memory. She could never go back to being just a nurse, to clocking in and out, to believing she had escaped. Nyx was back, and she wasn't a ghost anymore. Jinwoo turned from the window. The cold, hard mask of the boss was gone. In his eyes, she saw the man who had lost Hannah, the man who had built an empire on a foundation of pain and control. "My world took everything from Hannah," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "I swore I would never let anyone that close again. It was a promise I intended to keep." He took a step toward her. "You are the first debt I am glad to have." It was the closest he would ever come to a declaration. It was an admission of what she had become to him. Not an asset. Not a ghost.
A debt.
In his world, debts were everything. They were bonds of loyalty and blood, more powerful than any promise. He held out his hand. It was not a command. It was not a gesture to lead her. It was an offer. An invitation to a world of danger and power, a world she understood all too well. "Stay," he said. The single word was both a question and a statement of his will. Lena looked down at her own hands. They were a nurse's hands, meant to heal. But they had also wielded a weapon to protect this man. They had typed the code that had led his enemies to their deaths. They were not clean. Maybe they never had been. She looked back up at him, at the most dangerous man she had ever known, the only man who had ever seen both Lena and Nyx and not flinched. The only one who wanted both. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a warm, firm grip. It was not a promise of safety. It was a promise of survival. Together, they turned to face the window, the glittering, violent city sprawling beneath them, a kingdom waiting for its queen. The choice was made.